I was 19 years old when this happened. I had just started a summer job at a small auto repair shop in Georgia. My friend Liam invited me to a sleepover at his cousin Nathan's place out in the countryside. The house was old, a little run down, but had that cozy, rustic charm. It was supposed to be a simple night, just 3 guys, some snacks, and a few horror movies. We got there around 7 p.m., and the sun was setting behind the dense tree line. Nathan's house sat far from the main road, surrounded by acres of empty land. The nearest neighbor was at least a mile away. As soon as we got inside, I noticed the air felt strangely heavy, like the house had been sealed up for too long. Liam and Nathan didn't seem to notice, so I brushed it off. The living room had a large, old-fashioned fireplace and shelves filled with dusty books. We laid our sleeping bags on the wooden floor right in front of the TV. I remember Nathan making a joke about how the house was probably haunted because it used to belong to some old farmer who vanished years ago. We all laughed, but for some reason, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. We started watching a movie, some classic horror flick, but I wasn't really paying attention. My eyes kept drifting to the hallway that led deeper into the house. It was completely dark except for the faint glow of the bathroom nightlight. I could have sworn I saw something move, just a flicker, like a shadow shifting. My stomach knotted, but when I looked again, nothing was there. At around 11 p.m., Nathan got up to use the bathroom. Liam and I kept watching, munching on chips. But after a while, we realized Nathan hadn't come back. "Dude, he's been gone a while," Liam muttered, nudging me. I agreed, but before we could say anything else, we heard footsteps coming from the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Liam turned toward the sound, expecting Nathan, but the footsteps stopped just before reaching the living room. "Nathan," Liam called out. No response. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The silence stretched for a few seconds before Nathan finally walked in, looking confused. "Why'd you call me?" he asked. "I was in the kitchen." We exchanged glances, but neither of us wanted to admit what we'd heard. Nathan shrugged it off, saying, "You guys are paranoid," and sat back down. I tried to focus on the movie again, convincing myself it was just the old house settling, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. At midnight, we finally got tired and crawled into our sleeping bags. The room was quiet, except for the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, trying to shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Just as I was drifting off, I heard it. Breathing. It was faint but unmistakable, a slow, rhythmic inhale and exhale. It wasn't Liam or Nathan. Both of them were facing away from me, completely still. The sound was coming from the foot of my sleeping bag. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. The breathing continued, growing slightly louder, almost deliberate. I wanted to turn and look, but fear pinned me in place. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping, praying that it was just my imagination. A sudden shuffle made me jolt. The breathing stopped. I forced myself to peek, and my blood turned to ice. There was a figure standing at the foot of my sleeping bag. A tall, dark silhouette, motionless, as if it had been watching me the entire time. I couldn't move. My throat locked up, and my limbs felt paralyzed. The figure didn't make a sound. It just stood there. I thought about calling out to Liam or Nathan, but something in my gut told me not to. It was like whatever this was, it didn't want to be noticed. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it moved, not walked, glided. It shifted backward, fading into the darkness of the hallway. My body finally broke free from the paralysis, and I shot up, gasping for air. Liam stirred beside me. "Dude, what's wrong?" he mumbled, half asleep. I hesitated. "Nothing," I whispered. I didn't want to scare them, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I'd really seen it or if my mind was playing tricks on me. I laid back down, my heart still hammering, but sleep never came. I kept my eyes on the hallway, waiting. The rest of the night passed in unbearable silence, but something told me that whatever was in this house, it wasn't gone. The next morning, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. Liam and Nathan were joking around, acting like nothing happened, but I couldn't shake the memory of the figure standing at my feet. I wanted to tell them, but part of me was afraid they'd laugh, or worse, confirm that they had seen it too. After breakfast, Nathan mentioned something strange. "You guys hear anything weird last night?" My stomach tightened. "Like what?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He shrugged. "I woke up around 3 o'clock. Thought I heard footsteps." Liam rolled his eyes. "It's an old house, dude. It settles." But Nathan shook his head. These weren't random creaks. Someone was walking around. That confirmed it for me. I wasn't imagining things. Someone, or something, had been in the room with us. My mouth went dry, but before I could say anything, Nathan's phone rang. It was his grandfather. After a short, tense conversation, he hung up, looking pale. "He says we should leave now." We all stared at him. "Why?" Liam asked. Nathan hesitated before answering. He said he had a bad feeling. Said this house, it has a history. He wouldn't say anything more, just told us to pack up. The urgency in his voice convinced us. Within minutes, we were rolling up our sleeping bags, grabbing our stuff. As we were about to leave, something made me glance down the hallway where the figure had disappeared the night before. The door to one of the bedrooms was slightly open. It had been closed when we arrived. My breath caught. I felt like something was staring back at me. We hurried outside, stuffing our bags into Liam's car. As soon as the engine roared to life, I felt a weight lift, like we were escaping something that didn't want us to leave. As we pulled away, Nathan finally spoke. "My grandpa told me something weird. He said years ago, a man disappeared from this house. He was last seen sleeping in that same room." Liam and I exchanged a look, the realization sinking in. The figure I saw, it hadn't just been watching me. It had been standing where it once slept. The drive back to town was quiet. No one wanted to talk about it, but I could tell we were all thinking the same thing. Who was in that house with us? I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something sitting in the back seat. The weight of last night still clung to me like a damp, heavy blanket. Nathan was the first to break the silence. "I think my grandpa knows more than he's saying." He pulled out his phone and called him again. This time we could hear the old man's voice through the speaker. "Did you boys leave yet?" His voice was tight, urgent. When Nathan told him we were already on the road, he let out a slow breath. "Good. Don't ever go back." Liam frowned. "Why? What's wrong with that house?" There was a long pause, and then the old man finally said, "Because that place was built over an unmarked grave. The man who vanished, he was never found. People say he still roams there, watching anyone who dares to sleep inside." A shiver crawled up my spine. Liam shook his head. "That's just some old ghost story." But I wasn't so sure anymore. The way the figure stood at my feet, silent, waiting. It wasn't just some nightmare. It was real. And it wanted something. Then Nathan's phone screen flickered and went black. No warning, no low battery, just dead. The car's radio cut out at the same time. Silence filled the air, thick and suffocating. And then, faintly, beneath the hum of the tires, I heard it. Footsteps. I spun around, heart hammering. There was nothing there, just the empty road stretching behind us. But I knew what I heard. Someone, or something, had followed us. Liam pressed the gas pedal harder. "Screw this," he muttered. None of us spoke for the rest of the ride. When we finally got back to Nathan's house, I nearly collapsed with relief. But just as I was grabbing my bag, I noticed something. Dirt. Dark smudges of dirt on the floor of Liam's car. They weren't there before. And worse, there was a single faint footprint pressed into the fabric near my sleeping bag. Someone had been in the car with us. I was 15 when this happened. My friends and I had planned a simple sleepover at my friend Ryan's house. Nothing unusual, just movies, snacks, and staying up late. Ryan's basement was the perfect spot, dark, quiet, and isolated from the rest of the house. We had all been there before, but something about that night felt off from the start. There were 6 of us in total. Me, Ryan, Jake, Ethan, Tyler, and Max. We dragged our sleeping bags into the basement and set up around the TV. Ryan's parents were upstairs, but the basement felt like our own little world. The air was cold, the only light coming from the TV screen. The basement always had a weird, stale smell, like it hadn't been aired out in years. We started watching an old horror movie, laughing at the bad effects. The occasional floor creak from upstairs didn't bother us. We figured it was Ryan's parents moving around. But about an hour in, something weird happened. The basement door, which we had shut, was now slightly open. "Did someone go upstairs?" I asked. Everyone shook their heads. "Maybe one of your parents came down," Ethan suggested. But Ryan frowned. "No way. They always knock first," he muttered. He got up and shut it firmly. We tried to ignore it, but the room felt just a little colder after that. To lighten the mood, we took a group photo to remember the night. Ryan set his phone on a shelf, using the timer. We all huddled together, grinning at the camera before going back to the movie. Nothing seemed off until Ryan checked the picture. "Wait," he muttered. "What the hell? There's 7 of us." At first, we thought he was joking, but when he turned the phone toward us, our laughter died instantly. There were 6 of us sitting together, but in the far left corner, barely visible in the dim lighting, was a 7th person. The figure was still, slightly hunched forward. Their face was too shadowed to make out, but their head was tilted, watching us. Ethan snatched the phone. "No way, this has to be a trick." He zoomed in, but the figure stayed blurry, like it had been moving when the picture was taken. "Who the hell is that?" Jake whispered. The air in the room felt thicker, like something unseen was pressing down on us. Ryan stood up suddenly. "This is stupid. Let's just check the basement and make sure no one's messing with us." His voice was steady, but his hands were clenched into fists. No one wanted to admit it, but we were all scared. We grabbed our phones and turned on the flashlights. The basement wasn't big, just a main area with some old furniture, a closet, and a small storage room in the corner. The door to the storage room was shut, but suddenly I noticed something. The tiny gap at the bottom of the door. It was pitch black, but for a second, I swore I saw movement. "Guys," I whispered, pointing. Everyone turned their lights toward the door. The black space underneath was just empty now. Maybe I imagined it, but deep down, I knew I didn't. Ryan took a slow breath. "I'm opening it." He reached for the doorknob and twisted. The door creaked open. Inside, there were only old boxes and dust. But the room felt wrong, like someone had just been there and left the second before we looked inside. "Okay, screw this," Max said, backing away. "Let's just sleep, man. It's probably nothing." No one argued. We turned off the lights and climbed into our sleeping bags. The TV glow made the room feel safer, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the camera, just a mistake. But then I heard it. A faint shuffling sound from the corner of the room, the same place where the 7th person had been in the photo. I didn't want to look, but I had to. Slowly, I turned my head and saw a figure standing at the foot of Max's sleeping bag. I couldn't breathe. My body froze as my eyes locked onto the figure standing at the foot of Max's sleeping bag. It was tall, unnaturally thin, and completely still. The dim glow from the TV barely lit its face, but I could make out something wrong. Its head was tilted too far, like its neck was broken. I wanted to scream, to wake everyone up, but my throat felt like it was being crushed. Then the figure moved, a slight shift, as if it were leaning closer to Max. The blanket over him rose and fell with his steady breathing. He had no idea it was right there. Then it turned its head toward me. I shut my eyes, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it would wake the others. Maybe if I didn't move, it would go away. Maybe I was just imagining this. But the feeling of being watched was unbearable. I don't know how long I lay there frozen, but at some point, exhaustion won. When I woke up, the TV was off, and the room was silent. Morning light streamed in from the basement windows. My body felt tense, like I hadn't truly slept at all. Ryan groggily sat up. "Damn, my back hurts," he mumbled. "You guys sleep okay?" I hesitated. "Yeah, I guess." My eyes flickered toward Max. He was fine, still snoring softly. No one else had seen it. No one else knew. We started packing up our things when Ryan's mom called from upstairs. "Ryan, who else stayed the night?" Ryan frowned. "Just us." "Why?" There was a pause, then she said, "I saw someone else leaving this morning. I thought maybe a friend's parent picked them up early, but they went out the back door." Every hair on my body stood up. Ryan looked at us. "Guys, who left early?" No one spoke because we all knew the answer. No one had left. Ethan forced a laugh. Maybe she saw one of us go outside and come back in. But we all knew that wasn't true. None of us had woken up early. None of us had even gone near the back door. The air in the basement felt different now, like something had been there all night and just decided to leave in the morning without saying a word. We all grabbed our bags and hurried upstairs. The house felt warmer, safer, but deep down, I knew we had brought something with us. As I stepped outside, I had the overwhelming feeling that I shouldn't look back. That if I turned around, I'd see someone standing at the basement window, watching us leave. I didn't look. None of us spoke about it. Not in the car, not when we got home. It was like we all silently agreed. If we didn't talk about it, it wasn't real. But that night, as I lay in my bed, something kept gnawing at me. Ryan's mom saw someone leave, but what if they never actually left? I tried to shake the thought, but sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. That tall, broken figure standing by Max's sleeping bag, the way it had turned toward me. And worse, the feeling that it had been there the whole time. The next morning, I got a text from Ryan. "Dude, weird question. Did you hear anything last night?" My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what he meant. I texted back, "Why?" A few minutes later, he replied, "I swear to God I heard footsteps in my room. Thought it was my mom, but my door never opened." I stared at my phone, my hands clammy. Then another message came through. It was standing next to my bed, man. I could feel it. I nearly dropped my phone. The air in my room suddenly felt too still. I turned, looking at the door. It was shut, just like I left it. But for the first time in years, I felt the urge to check my closet. That day, none of us wanted to be alone. We met up at a diner near Ryan's house. The usual jokes and stupid conversations weren't there. It was clear we were all just trying to pretend. But something was different. Max kept rubbing his arms like he was cold. Ethan kept checking the diner window, and Ryan looked like he hadn't slept at all. "I had a dream," he finally said, stirring his untouched coffee. Or maybe it wasn't a dream. We waited. I was in the basement again. The TV was on. You guys were asleep, but I wasn't alone. He swallowed hard, then whispered. It got into my sleeping bag with me. None of us touched our food after that. I think we all knew. Whatever was in Ryan's basement that night, it hadn't just watched us. It had chosen to follow us home. I was 23 years old when this happened. I had just started working remotely as an IT specialist, which gave me the flexibility to travel. That summer, 4 of my closest friends and I planned a weekend getaway to Arizona, where we booked a secluded Airbnb cabin deep in the desert. The listing described it as rustic but cozy, featuring an old wooden bunk bed in one of the rooms. We arrived late in the evening, exhausted from the drive. The cabin was small and eerily quiet, surrounded by nothing but open desert. Inside, the floors creaked beneath our steps, and a faint musty smell filled the air. The furniture was antique, mismatched, and hadn't been used in a long time. Ryan, the jokester of our group, smirked. "Dude, this place looks like a horror movie waiting to happen." We laughed it off and started unpacking. The sleeping arrangements were simple. Jake and Ryan took the master bedroom, Sam and Eric claimed the pull-out couch, and I got stuck with the bunk bed in the smaller room. The top bunk was empty, but the bottom mattress felt stiff, old, and barely used. Not ideal, but it was just for a couple of nights. After settling in, we grilled some food outside, had a couple of beers, and played card games on the cabin's small dining table. The night air was warm, and the only sounds were the occasional gust of wind and distant desert wildlife. For a while, everything felt normal, relaxing even. It was around 1 a.m. when we finally decided to call it a night. As the others drifted off to their rooms, I climbed into the bottom bunk and got under the thin blanket. The air in my room felt oddly still, heavier than before. I turned onto my side, trying to shake the feeling. Then, as I was just about to drift off, I heard it. A slow, deliberate creaking. The sound of wood bending under weight coming from the top bunk. I held my breath. My first thought was that one of my friends had snuck in to mess with me. I turned onto my back and looked up, expecting to see someone peeking down, but the mattress above me was sagging slightly, as if someone was sitting there. I swallowed hard. "Ryan?" I whispered. No response. Slowly, I reached for my phone, turning on the flashlight with a shaky hand. I angled it toward the top bunk. It was empty. The old mattress looked just as it had before. Thin, dusty, untouched. But I swore I had felt it shift. Trying to shake the unease, I turned off my phone and pulled the blanket over my head. It was probably just the old wood settling, I told myself, my imagination running wild. Then I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of something shifting above me. The mattress didn't just sag this time, it pressed down. Someone, or something, was lying down. My body went rigid. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The weight above me wasn't shifting like someone turning over. It was sinking, slow and deliberate. I held my breath. I wanted to call out to my friends, but my voice felt stuck in my throat. Instead, I slid my phone under the blanket, blindly tapping at the screen until the flashlight turned on again. With a deep breath, I yanked the blanket off my face and pointed the light toward the top bunk. Empty. The mattress was perfectly flat. No indentation, no sign that anything or anyone had been there at all. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The air in the room felt heavier, colder somehow. I turned onto my side, forcing myself to breathe slower. Maybe I was just exhausted from the drive. Maybe the cabin's unsettling vibe was messing with me. I squeezed my eyes shut. Just go to sleep. That's when I heard it again. This time, it wasn't creaking. It was breathing. The sound was faint at first, just a soft, rhythmic inhale and exhale. But as I listened, my stomach twisted with dread. This wasn't my breathing. It was coming from above me. I held perfectly still, trying to convince myself it was the wind outside. Maybe a draft moving through the old wooden walls. But the sound was too close, too human. Each breath was slow, deliberate, as if someone was lying just inches above me, inhaling and exhaling with a steady rhythm. My hands tightened into fists under the blanket. I wanted to move, to sit up and turn on the light, but something deep inside me, some primal instinct, told me not to. Then the breathing stopped. I listened. My breath caught in my throat. The room was dead silent. No wind, no creaking, just an awful, heavy stillness pressing down on me. And then, a shift. The bunk bed creaked again, this time from the ladder. A slow, low, deliberate sound, like someone was climbing down. Panic surged through me. I clenched my teeth, my body locked in place. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. A weight in the room. A presence. Then the footsteps started. Soft, almost hesitant, moving away from the bed, across the wooden floor, toward the door. I barely breathed, forcing myself to listen. The steps stopped just outside the doorway. Then the door creaked open. The hallway beyond was pitch black. My heart pounded as I waited, expecting to hear the floorboards creak again, to hear whatever was in my room walk down the hall. But nothing came. I stayed frozen for what felt like an eternity. Then, with shaking hands, I reached for my phone, turning the flashlight toward the open door. Nothing. Just an empty hallway. But the door. I knew I had closed it before going to bed. Swallowing hard, I forced myself to sit up, my muscles feeling stiff, my hands damp with sweat. I kept the flashlight pointed at the doorway, half expecting something to lunge out of the darkness. But the hall remained still. I hesitated before swinging my legs over the side of the bed. My feet touched the cold wooden floor, and I instantly regretted it. The air in the room felt thick, charged. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to wake my friends. But something told me that if I made a sound, whatever had been in my room would come back. I took a shaky breath and stood up, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. Slowly, carefully, I stepped toward the door, peering out into the hallway. The cabin was completely silent. No movement, no sound of breathing. I reached for the light switch and flipped it on. The hallway flooded with dull yellow light, revealing nothing but the worn wooden floor and the entrance to the living room. Everything looked normal, but I wasn't convinced, because when I turned back to my bed, I saw it. The top bunk mattress was no longer empty. There was now a deep indentation, as if someone had been lying there the whole time. I felt my stomach drop. The indentation on the mattress wasn't just some small crease, it was deep, like someone had been lying there for hours. My breath came out shaky as I aimed my flashlight at the top bunk. There was nothing there. No blankets, no pillows, just the dark, pressed-down shape of where a body should have been. But there was no one. I took a step back, my foot creaking against the wooden floor. That's when I realized something even worse. The breathing had started again. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the top bunk. It was behind me. The air turned ice cold against the back of my neck. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The sound was slow and steady, too close. It was like something was standing inches away, exhaling softly against my skin. I turned around as fast as I could. There was nothing, just the open doorway leading into the dark hallway. But I knew I wasn't alone. I stumbled back toward the bed, my heart hammering. I wanted to wake up my friends, to scream, to run outside and never come back to this cabin. But I was too scared to make a sound. That's when the closet door creaked open. It was slow, deliberate. My phone's flashlight flickered slightly as I turned toward it. The closet was small, barely big enough for coats and a few storage boxes. But as I stared into the open space, I saw something that nearly made me drop my phone. There were handprints. Not dusty old marks, but fresh, smeared handprints trailing down the inside of the closet door. And they weren't mine. The air felt thick, suffocating. I took a slow step back, trying to tell myself that this was just my imagination. That's when I heard the whisper, right in my ear. "You took my bed." I don't remember much after that. I must have blacked out because the next thing I knew, it was morning. Sunlight was streaming through the curtains, and my friends were already packing up their bags, talking about how well they slept. I didn't say a word. I didn't tell them about the breathing, the footsteps, the whisper. I just glanced one last time at the bunk bed, at the top mattress still sunken in, as if someone was still lying there. And as we left the cabin, I swear I heard it one last time. The sound of slow, steady breathing. I was 17 years old when this happened. It was the summer before my senior year, and my best friend Jake had invited me for a sleepover at his house. His parents were out of town for the weekend, so we had the entire place to ourselves. But instead of sleeping inside, we decided to set up a tent in his backyard. It sounded like a fun idea at the time, camping under the stars, telling scary stories, and just enjoying the summer night. Jake's backyard was huge, with a tall wooden fence enclosing it. Beyond the fence was a stretch of trees that led to an open field. It wasn't exactly creepy during the day, but at night, the darkness seemed endless. We pitched the tent near the middle of the yard, far enough from the house to feel like we were actually camping, but still close enough to run inside if we needed to. We had our sleeping bags, some snacks, and a couple of flashlights. Typical sleepover essentials. As the night went on, we sat in the tent, laughing and sharing stories. The air was warm, the sky was clear, and everything felt peaceful. Around midnight, we both started getting tired. so we decided to turn off the flashlights and go to sleep. The only sounds were the crickets chirping and the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. I remember lying on my back, staring at the dark fabric of the tent above me, when I heard something that made my skin crawl. A soft shuffling sound coming from the other side of the backyard. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon or a stray cat moving around near the fence. But then I heard it again. A slow, deliberate step, like someone trying to move quietly. My body tensed as I listened closely. Jake must have heard it too, because he shifted in his sleeping bag and whispered, "Did you hear that?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me in the dark. "Yeah, maybe it's just the wind," I whispered back, though I didn't really believe that. The sound didn't match the wind. It was too rhythmic, too controlled. Another few seconds passed, and then we heard it again, this time closer. A distinct crunching noise, like someone stepping carefully on dry grass. We both sat up, our breath shallow. I grabbed the flashlight and aimed it toward the tent entrance, but I didn't turn it on yet. My mind was racing. Was it a person? Maybe one of Jake's neighbors? But why would someone be in his yard this late at night? Before I could think of another explanation, we heard something that sent a cold chill down my spine. A deep, ragged exhale just outside the tent. Jake and I froze. Neither of us moved. Neither of us breathed. It was like my body refused to make a sound. My mind screamed at me to do something, anything. But all I could do was sit there, paralyzed. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. And then, in the quiet, we heard it again. Another breath. This time slower. Closer. Jake slowly reached for his phone, his fingers trembling as he unlocked it. The glow from the screen barely illuminated his face, but I could see the terror in his eyes. He started typing a message, probably to his parents or the police. But before he could hit send, we heard the zipper of the tent start to move. I felt my stomach drop. The sound of the zipper sliding down was slow, deliberate. Jake and I sat frozen, unable to do anything but listen as the fabric parted inch by inch. My brain screamed at me to grab something, to run, to do anything, but my body wouldn't move. Jake's phone screen was still glowing in his hand, but his fingers hovered motionless above the screen. Then the zipper stopped. Whoever, or whatever, was outside had only unzipped it halfway. The silence that followed was unbearable. The air in the tent felt thick, suffocating. My grip on the flashlight tightened, my knuckles turning white. I didn't want to turn it on. I was too afraid of what I might see. But the not knowing was even worse. Jake, barely breathing, gave me a look. His eyes were wide with terror, but he slowly nodded toward the flashlight in my hands. He wanted me to turn it on. My heart pounded as I lifted it, hesitating for just a second. Then, with a deep breath, I flicked the switch. The beam cut through the darkness, landing directly on the half-open tent entrance. And that's when we saw it. There was a hand, pale, thin fingers curled slightly, gripping the fabric of the tent. It wasn't moving. It just stood there, unmoving, like whoever it belonged to was waiting for something. The flashlight beam shook in my hands as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The skin looked dry, almost grayish, like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. Jake let out a shaky whisper. "Who's there?" No response. The hand remained still, fingers pressing lightly against the material. Then, as if acknowledging that we had seen it, the fingers slowly curled tighter, gripping the tent fabric harder. My stomach twisted in fear. This wasn't normal. No one just stands like that, silently holding onto a tent in the middle of the night. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the hand slid out of sight. The fabric of the tent shifted slightly, like something had just let go. The silence returned. The only thing we could hear was our own shaky breathing. Jake and I looked at each other, both of us realizing the same horrifying truth. Whoever it was hadn't left. They were still out there. Jake grabbed my wrist, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dude, we need to get inside now." I nodded, my heart hammering in my chest. We had to be smart. If we ran out recklessly, whoever was out there could grab us. We needed a plan. The back door to Jake's house was about 20 feet away. If we could make a break for it fast enough, we could get inside and lock the doors. But what if he, or it, was standing right outside, waiting? Jake took a deep breath, gripping his phone tightly. "On three, we run." I clenched my jaw, nodding. He raised his fingers. 1, 2. A sound interrupted us, a low shuffling noise like footsteps moving around the side of the tent. Someone was circling us. The shuffling noise sent a cold wave through my body. Whoever was out there wasn't leaving. They were moving, circling, like they were waiting for something. Jake and I were locked in place, too afraid to unzip the tent the rest of the way, but too terrified to stay inside. The flashlight trembled in my grip, the beam flickering slightly as my hand shook. Then we heard it, a voice whispering. It was low, almost like the wind carrying a murmur, but it was there. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but Jake's face confirmed that he heard it too. The words weren't clear, but they were slow and deliberate. Someone was whispering just outside the tent, and then, a long, slow exhale. It was close. Too close. Jake gripped my arm so hard it hurt. "We run! Now!" I barely had time to react before he grabbed the tent zipper and yanked it down the rest of the way. The cold night air hit my face as Jake lunged forward, sprinting toward his house. My legs followed before my brain could process what I was doing. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see who, or what, had been standing outside. But as we ran, I caught something from the corner of my eye. A figure. Not running, not even walking, just standing. It was by the fence, in the farthest corner of the yard, half hidden in the shadows. A man. Tall, thin, unmoving. His head was tilted slightly, and even from that distance, I could tell he was looking right at us. We crashed through the back door, slamming it behind us and locking it. Jake's parents were asleep upstairs, completely unaware that something was outside. We stood there, panting, listening. Silence. I slowly moved toward the window and peered out. The yard was empty. The tent was still there, unzipped, the flashlight still lying on the ground. But the man, the figure, was gone. My stomach twisted. We had just seen him standing there. He couldn't have disappeared that fast. Jake turned to me, whispering, "Did you see his face?" I shook my head. I hadn't. The shadows had hidden it too well. But something about the way he stood, so perfectly still, was worse than if he had been chasing us. It was like he had been waiting, watching, expecting something. We stayed awake for hours, checking the windows, expecting to see movement in the yard. But there was nothing, not even footprints. The next morning, we went outside to pack up the tent. The yard was still undisturbed. No sign that anyone had ever been there. No tracks, no torn fabric. Nothing. It was as if the night before had been a dream. But as we lifted the tent, Jake suddenly froze. His face went pale, his hands gripping the fabric tightly. Because underneath the tent, pressed deep into the dirt, was a single, perfectly shaped footprint, facing directly toward the house. I don't know who that man was. I don't know what he wanted. But the worst part? Jake's backyard was completely fenced in. There was no way in, and no way out.